Before we descend into the shadows of the Ozark Hills, I want to thank you for joining me. If you enjoy tales of forgotten places and the horrors they conceal, please take a moment to subscribe to this channel. It ensures these lost stories continue to find you in the dark. The year 1909 had been a damp one for Missouri. The mud, a thick, greedy clay, seemed determined to pull the boots right off a man's feet, or worse, swallow his horse whole. Arthur Vance, a man who prided himself on his logical mind and his crisp St. Louis haberdashery, felt the dampness not just in his wool suit, but in his very bones. He was a collector of stories, a folklorist, though his publication preferred the more respectable term, regional anthropologist. He was in the Ozarks to hunt down authentic American ballads, the pure, unvarnished songs of the isolated hills, songs he feared would soon be silenced by the relentless march of the 20th century, by the telegraph and the coming of the automobile. He had ridden his rented mule, Jezebel, for 2 days since leaving the nearest semblance of a railway station. His destination was a place not found on any reliable map, a vague area known only as Whispering Hollow, rumored to be home to a community that had kept the old ways since before the Civil War. His immediate stop, however, was Sparrow's Gap. It was not a town. It was a clearing where the mud road forked, dominated by a single sagging structure that served as a general store, post office, and livery. A few grizzled men in denim overalls, their faces topographical maps of hardship, sat on the porch, whittling and spitting tobacco juice that sizzled on the damp wood. They stopped their quiet mumbling as Arthur dismounted. Their eyes, all pale blue or cloudy gray, appraised him with a profound, unnerving stillness. Arthur, wiping the sweat and grime from his spectacles, approached the proprietor, a man whose beard seemed to contain remnants of several past meals. "Good day, sir. I'm looking for directions. I'm told there's a settlement deeper in these hills, perhaps in a place called Whispering Hollow." The store owner, Silas, simply stared. The whittling stopped. The air grew thick. Finally, one of the men on the porch, the oldest of the bunch, spoke. His voice was like dry leaves skittering over rock. "Ain't no Whispering Hollow, mister." "Oh?" Arthur replied, forcing a polite smile. "Perhaps it goes by another name? I'm a folklorist, here to record old songs. I was assured there's a congregation back in these hills. A very private one." The old man, who the others called Hemlock, spat a dark stream of tobacco. "There's a hollow, right enough. But it ain't whispering. It's listening. And the folk in there, they ain't the singing kind. Not songs you'd want to hear." Silas, the proprietor, finally spoke, his voice low. "You'd best turn that mule around, mister. We don't much cotton to flatlanders poking around here, but we'd rather you leave alive than not at all. That hollow, it's soured. The ground there is hungry." Arthur, ever the rationalist, mistook their warnings for the typical rural suspicion he'd encountered before. He'd faced locked doors and veiled threats in Appalachia and the Delta. This was just another iteration of the same. "I assure you, gentlemen, I mean no harm. I merely wish to preserve their heritage. If you could just point me toward the trailhead." Hemlock stood up, his joints cracking like brittle twigs. He pointed with his whittling knife, not toward a path, but toward a dense, dark ridge in the distance. "There's a dry creek bed about 5 miles east of here. Follow it north toward that ridge. The path will find you. But when you feel the air go still, when the birds stop singing and the insects go quiet, that's your last chance to turn back. That's the boundary. They call themselves the Congregation of the Rooted Stone, and they don't take kindly to strangers bearing the scent of the world." Arthur thanked them, purchased some tinned beef and hardtack he didn't want, and remounted Jezebel. As he rode away, he felt their eyes on his back, a unified gaze as heavy and cold as a burial shroud. He dismissed it as superstition, the primitive fear of isolated people. He could not have been more wrong. The dry creek bed was less a path and more a geological scar, a jagged trench of loose shale and smooth gray stones that twisted upward into the deep woods. The mule Jezebel was unhappy. She balked several times, her ears flattened, snorting at shadows that seemed to pool in the midday gloom. The trees here were different. Elsewhere, the Ozark woods were a riot of oak, hickory, and pine. Here, the canopy was dominated by massive, ancient sycamores, their white, mottled bark looking like leprous skin in the dim light. Arthur pushed on, his journalistic ambition warring with a creeping, irrational dread. The warnings from Sparrow's Gap echoed in his mind. The ground there is hungry. Nonsense, he told himself. Primitive animism. Then, just as Hemlock had predicted, the world went silent. It wasn't a gradual fading. It was as if a heavy blanket had been thrown over the forest. The ceaseless thrum of cicadas, gone. The chirping of wrens and cardinals, vanished. Even the sound of his mule's hooves on the rock seemed muffled, deadened. The only sound was his own breathing and the frantic pounding of his heart. The air grew cold, heavy and metallic, carrying a scent he couldn't quite place. It was the smell of a root cellar, of damp earth, ozone, and something else. Something vaguely like spoiled meat. He had crossed the boundary. He saw the markers then, woven into the branches of the sycamores. They weren't boundary flags or carved symbols. They were corn-husk dolls, dozens of them, hanging by strands of what looked like human hair. They were warped, twisted into shapes of agony, their small, fiber-wrought faces frozen in silent screams. They turned slowly in the dead air, watching him. Jezebel let out a high, terrified bray and refused to move. Arthur, his hands shaking, dismounted. It's just superstition, old girl. Just folk nonsense to scare off travelers. But his voice was a thin, unconvincing whisper. He tied the mule to a low-hanging branch, knowing she'd likely break free and flee. He couldn't blame her. He adjusted the satchel containing his notebook and pencils and proceeded on foot. The hollow opened up before him suddenly. It was a deep bowl in the earth, perfectly round, as if a giant thumb had pressed into the rock. The sunlight here was different, filtered through a permanent haze that hung over the settlement, giving everything a sickly, greenish-yellow tint. The place was larger than he'd expected. Perhaps 24 cabins, built not of rough-hewn logs, but of dark, flat river stones, chinked with the same gray mud that lined the roads. They looked less like houses and more like tombs. In the exact center of this village stood a larger structure. It was built of the same dark stone, but it was long and low with no windows at all. A single heavy door of black wood faced him. It was a chapel, he assumed. But there was no cross, no steeple, no bell. A thin plume of wood smoke rose from one cabin, the only sign of life. He felt, rather than saw, the eyes upon him. He was being watched from every shadow, every dark doorway. He was an infection, a foreign body, and the hollow was already mounting its immune response. Arthur stood in the center of the village clearing for what felt like an eternity, his city suit a beacon of vulnerability. The silence was absolute. He was about to call out, to announce himself, when the door of the windowless chapel opened with a sound like a tomb being unsealed. A man emerged. He was impossibly tall and gaunt, wrapped in a homespun robe the color of dried blood. His head was shaved, and his skin was a pale, almost translucent white, as if he'd never stood in direct sunlight. But it was his eyes that held Arthur captive. They were the color of the stones, a flat, depthless gray, and they burned with a cold, intellectual fire. He held no weapon, yet he was the most dangerous-looking man Arthur had ever encountered. The man glided more than walked across the clearing, his bare feet making no sound on the packed earth. He stopped 10 feet from Arthur, his hands clasped before him. "The world has sprung a leak," the man said. His voice was not the rough drawl of the hills Arthur had expected. It was cultured, precise, with an archaic cadence, like a forgotten judge passing sentence. "And you, traveler, are the drip." Arthur cleared his throat, the sound ridiculously loud. "My name is Arthur Vance. I am a folklorist from St. Louis. I come in peace. I am here to learn. To record your songs, your history." The tall man tilted his head, a gesture of mild curiosity, like a hawk studying a field mouse. "Songs, history, these are the words of the fading world. We do not sing songs, Mr. Vance. We keep the score. We do not remember history. We serve the tenure." He came closer. The smell Arthur had noticed in the woods was stronger on him. Damp earth, mold, and that faint, sharp tang of ozone. "I am Brother Malachi. I am the voice of this congregation. The congregation of the rooted stone." As if summoned by his words, The other doors began to open. The people who emerged mirrored their leader. They were all pale, dressed in the same drab, earth-toned homespun. They moved with a slow, deliberate grace, their faces blank, their eyes fixed on Arthur. He noticed with a jolt that there were no old people. No one seemed over the age of 40. And more chillingly, he saw no children under the age of 10. "You have crossed the boundary," Malachi continued, his voice resonant. "The uninvited, the blighted. By our law, you should be turned back into the soil before your sickness spreads." "Sickness?" Arthur stammered. "I assure you, I am in perfect health. You breathe the air of the outside," Malachi said, as if this were the most obvious fact in the world. "You carry its rust, its decay, its noise. You are rife with the blight of time." Arthur felt a panic he hadn't known he possessed. He was trapped. "Please, I mean no harm. I will leave. I will tell no one. I was mistaken." Brother Malachi stared at him, his gray eyes seeming to pierce Arthur's skull and read the thoughts rattling within. For a long moment, the only sound was the wind, which had returned, making the corn-husk dolls at the hollow's edge twist and dance. "No," Malachi said finally, a strange, thin smile touching his lips. "You are here. The stone has allowed your presence. It is curious. It has been long since we tested our faith against a man of logic. You will be our guest, Mr. Vance. You will see our history. You will learn our songs, and you will provide a fresh perspective." The smile vanished. "Sister Bethia," he called without turning. A woman with hair the color of straw and the same empty eyes stepped forward. "See to our guest. Give him the harvester's cabin. See that he is comfortable. He will dine with us tonight. He has much to learn, and much to teach." As we settle into the unsettling quiet of the hollow, I'd like to ask you for a small favor. If this story is holding you captive, please consider subscribing and liking this video. It's the small click that helps our community of the macabre grow and unearth more tales like this. Your support means the world, and it keeps the darkness at bay, or perhaps invites it in. The harvester's cabin was a small, one-room stone hut at the very edge of the clearing, nearest the woods. Like the others, it had no windows, only a heavy wooden door and a small smoke hole in the roof. The air inside was thick with the omnipresent smell of damp earth and a fainter, lingering scent of iron. There was a rough-hewn cot, a stool, and a cold hearth. It was less a guest room and more a cell. Sister Bethia deposited a bucket of cloudy water and a block of coarse, gray-green soap. "You will wash," she commanded, her voice flat. "Brother Malachi cannot abide the stink of the world at his table." She left, pulling the heavy door shut. Arthur heard the unmistakable sound of a thick wooden bar sliding into place from the outside. He was a prisoner. He scrubbed his face and hands, the soap feeling abrasive like scouring powder. He looked at his reflection in the dark water. His face was pale, his eyes wide with a fear that was quickly eclipsing his professional curiosity. This was not a quaint, isolated folk community. This was something else, something broken. Hours passed. The dim light filtering through the smoke hole faded. True darkness fell, an oppressive, absolute black. He was about to light one of his precious matches when the bar on his door scraped back. It was Sister Bethia, holding a single kerosene lamp. "It is time." He was escorted to the largest cabin, presumably Malachi's. Inside, the furniture was sparse, but the walls were lined with shelves. Arthur's eyes widened. They were filled with books, not just Bibles but philosophy, natural sciences, poetry. He saw volumes of Locke, of Darwin, of Poe. Brother Malachi sat at the head of a long, rough table, the lamplight casting deep, skeletal shadows across his face. "Sit, Mr. Vance, a man who reads. I confess, I miss the friction of an educated mind. My congregation, they are pure, but they are simple vessels." A meager supper was served by Bethia, a watery stew of pale, unidentified root vegetables and a dense black bread that tasted of minerals. "You find our hospitality lacking?" Malachi asked, not eating, but watching Arthur choke down the food. "It's hearty," Arthur lied. "Brother Malachi, your books, Darwin, This is not the library of a simple hill preacher. Malachi smiled, that cold, thin smile. Oh, we are not simple, Mr. Vance. We are focused. I read Mr. Darwin to understand the mechanics of the sickness. He calls it evolution, a process of random, wasteful change. We know it as the blight. The world outside believes itself to be progressing. We know it is merely decomposing. Decomposing? The world is growing. Cities, industry, science. Like a tumor. Malachi interrupted, his voice sharp. Like a rot that blossoms. Look at you. Your clothes, your spectacles, your soft hands. You are a creature of comfort, of artifice. You are separated from the soil. We are rooted. We are eternal. What is this place? Arthur asked, his voice barely a whisper. What do you believe? Malachi leaned forward, the lamplight catching the fanatic gleam in his gray eyes. We believe in the soil, Mr. Vance. We believe the earth is not a dead thing to be plundered. It is a living, sleeping, hungry intelligence, and it has chosen this hollow as its heart. We are its guardians, its caretakers. We keep it pure. We keep it fed. Fed? The word landed like a stone in Arthur's stomach. The world outside is dying of the blight of age, of weakness, of doubt. These things are an insult to the stone, the rooted stone, in the chapel. It is the part of the sleeping intelligence that has surfaced to commune with us. It offers us vitality. It keeps us strong, free from sickness, free from the decay of the years. In return, we prune. Prune? As a good gardener prunes a branch to save the tree, we prune the blight from our own flock. It is a simple, beautiful transaction, a tithing of the spirit. And the stone? The stone is pleased. A cold sweat broke out on Arthur's neck. He remembered the village. No old people, no children under 10. What happens to the blight? Brother Malachi stood, his shadow swallowing Arthur. You are a man of songs, Mr. Vance. Tomorrow the congregation gathers. You will be our honored guest. You will hear our oldest song, the song of the pruning. Arthur did not sleep. He was returned to his stone hut and locked in. He sat on the cot in the suffocating darkness, his mind racing, trying to apply logic to the fanaticism he had just heard. The stone, the blight, the pruning. It was a theology of sacrifice, a dark, chthonic religion dressed in the borrowed robes of Christian rhetoric. Malachi was intelligent, clearly, but he was also profoundly, dangerously mad. And the entire hollow was trapped in his madness. Sometime in the small hours, he heard it. It wasn't a sound at first, but a vibration. It came from the ground itself, a low, subsonic thrum that he felt in his teeth and his sternum. It was the chanting he had heard rumors of, but it wasn't human. It was deeper, slower. It was the rhythm of something immense and subterranean. Then, the whispers started. They seemed to come from the stone walls of his hut. Not words, but sibilant overlapping sounds, like dry leaves scraping, or 1,000 insects burrowing. It was the sound of the hollow thinking. It was the sound of the rooted stone. He pressed his ear to the cold, damp rock. The whispers were hypnotic. He felt his analytical mind, his St. Louis logic, begin to fray. The whispers spoke of peace, of release. They spoke of the burden of thought, the pain of memory, the sickness of individuality. They promised to take it all away, to dissolve him into something greater, quieter, stronger. Join the soil. Be pruned of your pain. Be one with the stone. He recoiled, slamming his back against the opposite wall, gasping. The stone was sentient. It was actively trying to convert him, to break him down. The door scraped open. It wasn't Bethia. It was a younger woman, perhaps 18. She moved with the same eerie, gliding motion as the others, but her eyes held a spark of something Malachi's did not. Fear. She held a small bowl of cracked corn. You must eat, she whispered. Her voice was thin, rusty from disuse. Who are you? Arthur whispered back, desperate for a human connection. I am Ilara. She glanced back toward the dark clearing. You "You are from outside?" "Yes, St. Louis." "Have you ever been outside?" She shook her head. "The outside is blight. Brother Malachi teaches us." "Ilara, what he teaches is wrong. It's madness. This pruning." Her eyes widened, the spark of fear turning into a blaze of terror. "You must not speak of it. The stone hears. It tells him everything." "Hears? How?" It whispers in our sleep. It shows us things. It found the blight in my grandmother. It found it in my mother." "What happened to them, Ilara?" Arthur asked, though he already knew the answer. "They were pruned," she whispered, a single tear tracing a path through the grime on her cheek. "They were taken to the chapel. They gave their sickness to the stone, to keep us strong." But her voice broke, betraying a doubt that the stone had not yet scoured from her. "My brother," she choked out. "Thomas, he has the lung sickness. He coughs in the night. He's weak. Brother Malachi, he's been watching him. The gathering tomorrow. The song of the pruning. It's for Thomas." Arthur felt a chill that had nothing to do with the damp cabin. "They're going to sacrifice your brother." It's not a sacrifice," she recited, the words sounding hollow, learned. "It is an honor. He purifies the congregation." "Ilara, listen to me," Arthur said, grabbing her thin wrist. Her skin was cold as marble. "What Malachi is doing isn't an honor. It's murder. In my world, we have doctors. We could help your brother." She looked at her feet, her body trembling. "It is forbidden. There is no help but the stone. Help me, Ilara. Help me get to your brother. Help me get you both out of here. This isn't life. This is a prison." She looked up, her eyes wide with a terrible, desperate hope. "It's not possible. No one leaves the hollow. The stone holds us. Even if we pass the boundary, its voice, it would still be in our heads. We can try," Arthur pleaded. Before she could answer, a shadow fell across the doorway. Sister Bethia stood there, her face a mask of cold fury. "The vessel is cracked," Bethia hissed, her eyes on Ilara. "You speak the blight to the outsider." Ilara whimpered and scrambled back. Bethia grabbed her by the hair and dragged her from the cabin. "The stone sees your doubt, girl. It will be scoured. The pruning will be rich tomorrow." The bar slammed shut, leaving Arthur alone once more, the subterranean thrumming growing louder, and the whispers returning, eager to reclaim his mind. The next day, no one came to Arthur's cabin. He was left in the dark, a prisoner forgotten. The air in the stone hut grew thick and close, and the constant, low-frequency thrumming from the earth was beginning to wear on his sanity. He paced the small space, his boots wearing a groove in the dirt floor. He was a man of reason, a man of the new century, and he was trapped in a nightmare from the dark ages. He tried the door, but it was solid, immovable. He searched the stone walls, hoping for a loose rock, a crack, anything. But the construction was seamless. The stones fitted with mortar-like precision. The hollow was a machine designed for containment. As the light from the smoke hole began to fade, he knew the gathering was near. The thrumming intensified, becoming a palpable physical force that shook the dust from the ceiling. It was joined by a new sound, a high, keening wail. It wasn't human, and it wasn't the wind. It was the sound of the corn-husk dolls at the hollow's edge, vibrating in a wind only they could feel. Then, the bar on his door was drawn back. Two men, as pale and silent as the others, stood in the doorway. They wore the same dark robes as Malachi. They grabbed Arthur by the arms. He struggled, but it was pointless. Their grip was like iron. Their strength was unnatural, inorganic. It was the strength of the stone. They dragged him out into the twilight clearing. The entire congregation, perhaps 50 or 60 souls, was moving in a slow, shuffling procession toward the windowless chapel. They moved as one, their heads bowed, their feet silent on the earth. The greenish-yellow haze that hung over the hollow had thickened, and in the gloom, Arthur saw that the rooted stone chapel was glowing. A faint, sickly green light pulsed from the cracks between the stones, throbbing in time with the subterranean pulse. Arthur saw Ilara. She was being held between Sister Bethia and another woman. Her face was streaked with tears, her eyes wide and vacant. She had been scoured of her rebellion. He also saw the boy, Thomas. He was small for his age, perhaps 9 years old, and racked by a deep, wet cough. He was dressed in a clean white shift. He wasn't being dragged. He was being carried on a wooden litter like a pale, sickly king. His eyes were closed, his face serene. He had been convinced of his honor. "Mr. Vance," a voice said. Brother Malachi was beside him. He, too, was staring at the chapel. "You are privileged. Most outsiders, the blighted, are simply turned back to the soil at the boundary. But you are a chronicler. It is fitting you should chronicle this, the final, purest song." "This is an abomination, Malachi," Arthur spat, his fear giving way to a desperate, defiant rage. "You are killing that boy." "Killing?" Malachi looked at him, genuinely puzzled. "One cannot kill a spoiled apple. One removes it so the barrel does not rot. The boy's spirit is weak. His flesh is failing. He is a vessel of the blight. We are not killing him, Mr. Vance. We are decanting him. His weakness will be rendered. His sickness will be consumed. And his small, pure spirit will be unbound, dissolved into the strength of the stone. It is a beautiful mercy." "He's a child," Arthur roared, struggling against the guards. "He is a tithe," Malachi said, his voice cold as the grave. "And tonight, the tithe is twofold." They had reached the heavy black door of the chapel. It stood open. The pulsing green light and the smell of ozone and damp earth poured out like a physical wave. "After the boy, we will see what the stone makes of your doubt, Mr. Vance. It has been so long since it has tasted a mind so complex. It is eager." Arthur was shoved through the doorway into the pulsing green darkness of the rooted stone. The inside of the chapel defied all of Arthur's rational understanding. The air was cold, yet electrified, making the hair on his arms stand on end. The green light was not from lamps. It emanated from the very center of the long, windowless room. There were no pews, no altar, no pulpit. The congregation stood lining the walls, their faces upturned, their eyes half closed, swaying in time to the thrumming that was now so loud it seemed to shake his skeleton. In the center of the room, the dirt floor gave way to a massive, pulsating thing. Arthur had expected a large rock, perhaps a strange mineral formation. This was not a rock. It was a dense, tangled mass of what looked like petrified roots, as thick as a man's torso, woven together into a central throbbing nexus. It was gray-green, slick with a strange phosphorescent slime, and it was undeniably alive. It was the source of the thrumming. It was the heart of the hollow. This was the rooted stone. Tendrils, thin as wire and hard as stone, snaked from the central mass, spreading out under the floor, and, Arthur realized with a wave of nausea, into the very walls of the chapel and beyond. The entire village was built upon this thing. The stone cabins were not just houses. They were anchors, pinning this entity to the earth. Or perhaps they were feeding troughs. "Beautiful, is it not?" Malachi whispered, his voice filled with religious ecstasy. "The heart of God, the root of all things. It sleeps beneath us, and in its slumber, it dreams us." The two men holding Arthur forced him to his knees at the edge of the central mass, forcing his face toward the stone. The congregation began to chant. It was not a hymn. It was one word, repeated over and over, a guttural descending monotone. Yoth Sagoth, Yoth Sagoth, Yoth Sagoth. The thrumming shifted pitch, becoming a sickening, wet, sloshing sound. The stone was waking. The litter carrying Thomas was brought forward. The boy was gently lifted by Sister Bethia and another acolyte. He was still serene, his eyes closed, as if drugged. "Brother Thomas," Malachi intoned, his arms raised, "you are chosen. You are the pruning. Your weakness sours the soil. Your sickness insults the root. Give it. Give it freely. Cleanse the congregation. Cleanse the congregation!" The flock echoed, their voices a hollow roar. Thomas was laid gently at the base of the rooted stone. He was laid on it. Arthur wanted to scream, to look away, but he was held fast. He had to watch. The boy coughed, a wet, rattling sound. The stone reacted. The slick, gray-green surface of the root pulsed. Small, fibrous tendrils, like pale mycelium, emerged from the petrified wood. They tasted the air. Then, finding the boy, they swarmed him. They did not pierce his skin. They clung to him. They covered his white shift, his pale hands, his face. Thomas's eyes snapped open, but there was no terror in them. There was only a vast, empty surprise. A faint green mist began to rise from the boy's body. It was his vitality, his life force, being drawn from him. The sound was horrific, a high-pitched, sizzling hiss, like water on a superheated skillet. Arthur watched in abject horror as the boy aged. His skin, already pale, became parchment thin, clinging to his bones. His hair turned white, then gray, then fell away. His body shriveled, contracted, his limbs curling in on themselves like a dying spider. He did not scream. He simply faded. In less than a minute, there was nothing left but a small, desiccated husk, a child-sized mummy, which the tendrils pulled into a fissure in the central stone. The fissure closed with a wet, sucking sound. The congregation moaned in collective ecstasy. The green light of the stone pulsed brighter, stronger. The thrumming became almost a note of triumph. Brother Malachi turned, his face flushed with rapture, his gray eyes shining. "Do you see, Mr. Vance? The blight is consumed. The congregation is strong." Arthur Vance, the rationalist, the folklorist, finally broke. He vomited onto the dirt floor, his entire body shaking with a terror so profound it felt like his soul was trying to flee his body. Malachi's rapturous expression faded, replaced by cold disgust. Such a human reaction. "You are overflowing with the blight. You stink of it. Of fear, of doubt, of mortality." He nodded to the two men holding Arthur. "Now, the second tithe. The stone is still hungry. It is time to see what song you have to sing." The two men hauled Arthur to his feet. He fought them, twisting and kicking with a desperate, animalistic strength he hadn't known he possessed. "No! Get off me! You monsters! You insane, godless monsters!" His resistance was futile. It was like fighting statues. They dragged him forward, his boots scoring trenches in the dirt floor. The congregation watched, their faces no longer ecstatic, but hungry. They were a pride of lions, and he was the wounded goat. "Godless?" Malachi chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "We are the most godly of all, Mr. Vance. Our God is here. We can touch it. It answers our prayers. It feeds us. Can your vapor god in the sky do that?" They were at the edge of the pulsating stone. Arthur could feel the heat and the cold radiating from it, the static charge that smelled of ozone. The fine, fibrous tendrils were already emerging, writhing in the air, tasting his proximity. They knew he was next. "What is your logic now, man of St. Louis?" Malachi taunted, his face inches from Arthur's. "What does your science say about this?" Arthur, panting, his mind ablaze with terror, spat in Malachi's face. The preacher didn't flinch. He slowly wiped the spittle from his cheek. "The blight," he whispered. "It is so potent in you. The stone will feast." The guards shoved Arthur forward. He fell, his hands landing on the slick, cold, living surface of the root. The moment his skin made contact, a shock wave of agony and ice shot up his arms. It wasn't just a physical shock, it was a mental one. The stone invaded him. He felt its immense alien consciousness, cold, ancient, and utterly without malice or pity. It was simply hungry. He felt the whispers from the cabin, but 1,000 times stronger. They flooded his mind, scouring his memories. He saw his office in St. Louis, his collection of books, the face of his mother, and he felt the stone pulling at these memories, consuming them. It was draining his very identity. The fibrous tendrils slithered up his arms, enveloping him. He tried to scream, but his lungs wouldn't obey. The green mist, his life, began to rise from his skin. He felt his limbs grow heavy, his thoughts becoming slow, thick, and distant. He was dying. He was being undone. "The song is beautiful," Malachi murmured, watching the process. It was then that he heard a scream, not his own, a human scream. "No! Leave him!" Ilara. She had broken free from Sister Bethia. Her eyes were no longer vacant. They were blazing with a grief and rage so pure it had burned away the stone's conditioning. She had seen her brother consumed. She would not see this stranger, the only person who had offered her hope, meet the same fate. She wasn't running at Malachi. She was running past him. In her hand, she held the kerosene lamp that Sister Bethia had been holding by the door. "Blasphemer!" Bethia shrieked, realizing her intent. But it was too late. With a final, desperate scream of defiance, Ilara hurled the lit lamp directly at the central, pulsating mass of the rooted stone. The glass lamp shattered against the slick, petrified surface. Kerosene, burning brightly, splashed across the central nexus. For a moment, nothing happened. The stone was wet, and the fire seemed to hiss, struggling for purchase. Then the phosphorescent, oily slime that coated the stone ignited. The fire did not burn yellow. It exploded in a flash of brilliant, searing emerald green. The congregation screamed as the intense light blinded them. The stone itself, the ancient sleeping god beneath the hollow, reacted not with a sound, but with a shriek. It was a psychic, bone-jarring wave of pure agony that blasted outward, throwing everyone in the chapel to the ground. The thrumming stopped. The subterranean pulse ceased as if a great heart had been stabbed. The tendrils gripping Arthur instantly retracted, as if shocked. He collapsed to the ground, free, gasping, his mind his own again, though it felt bruised and violated. The green mist around him vanished. The stone was burning, and it was dying. The chapel filled with a choking, acrid smoke that smelled of burning chemicals and cooked meat. The emerald flames leaped high, catching the dry wooden beams of the roof. Brother Malachi was on his knees, staring at his burning god. His face was a mask of disbelief and apocalyptic horror. What have you done?" he bellowed, his voice no longer cultured, but a raw, broken animal howl. You've killed it! You've killed the world!" The congregation was in chaos. Their god was in pain, and its pain was being transmitted directly into their minds. They clawed at their faces, screamed in sympathetic agony, and thrashed on the floor. Their connection, their hive mind, was severed, leaving them alone in their own skulls for the first time in their lives. Sister Bethia, her robe smoldering, rose with a shriek of her own. She saw Ilara, who was huddled near the door, and charged her hands hooked into claws. "Witch! Blight carrier! You've damned us all!" "Ilara!" Arthur yelled, scrambling to his feet. He intercepted Bethia, tackling her to the ground. She fought with the same inorganic strength as the others, her fingers digging for his eyes. But the stone was dying, and her strength was fading. Arthur, fueled by adrenaline, struck her once, and she lay still. The fire was consuming the chapel. Burning rafters began to fall. The rooted stone was now pulsing a sick, fading brown, the emerald flames turning to a dull, smoky orange. "Arthur!" Ilara screamed, grabbing his hand. "We have to go! The hollow it's falling!" She was right. The ground itself was shaking. The chapel, its foundation now a burning, dying entity, was groaning as the stones began to shift. The god of the hollow was collapsing in on itself, and it was taking its church with it. Arthur grabbed Ilara's hand. "This way!" They scrambled for the door, choking on the black smoke. Behind them, he heard Malachi. The preacher was not trying to escape. He was crawling toward the burning stone, his arms outstretched. "My God," he wept. "Take me with you. Take me." He threw himself onto the burning pyre of his god. The flames enveloped him instantly. Arthur and Ilara burst out of the chapel door and into the night air. The scene in the hollow was one from Dante's Inferno. The fire was spreading from the chapel, leaping to the dry roofs of the stone cabins. But worse, the ground was breaking apart. The entire hollow, a perfect bowl, was a geological anomaly, and its keystone, the rooted stone, was now dead. The earth groaned. Fissures split the clearing. The cabins were not just burning. They were sliding, collapsing into sinkholes that were opening up everywhere, swallowing the homes and the screaming, panicked congregation. "This way! To the boundary!" Arthur yelled, pulling Ilara toward the dark woods, toward the hidden creek bed he had followed in. They ran. They ran as the ground cracked and fell away behind them. They ran as the screams of the damned, the last members of the horrifying congregation of the rooted stone, were silenced one by one as the earth reclaimed its tithe. They did not look back as the entire hollow, the chapel, the cabins, and the history of generations of madness collapsed into the earth, buried by a plume of smoke, fire, and time. The journey back through the silent woods was a new kind of terror. The absolute quiet of the boundary was gone, replaced by the distant roar of the collapsing hollow and the crashing of ancient trees as the ground gave way. The air stank of sulfur and ash. Arthur and Alara ran, stumbling over roots, falling in the dark, driven by a primal fear. They found the dry creek bed. Arthur half-carried Alara, who was in a state of shock, trembling and weeping for the brother she had watched be consumed and the world she had just destroyed. They didn't stop until the first rays of the 1909 dawn, a clean, normal, rational dawn, broke over the Missouri hills. And with the dawn, the sounds of the real world returned. A bird chirped, a squirrel chattered. Arthur fell to his knees, tears of relief streaming down his smoke-stained face. The silence was broken. The song of the stone was finished. They found the mule, Jezebel, mercifully, still tied to the tree, trembling but unharmed. Arthur cut her free, put Alara on her back, and began the long, slow walk back to Sparrow's Gap. When they emerged from the woods, stumbling into the muddy clearing of the trading post, the effect was immediate. Old Man Hemlock, Silas, and the same group of whittlers were on the porch, as if they had never left. They stood in unison. Their faces were not surprised. They were pale, and they were terrified. He came back," Silas whispered, his eyes wide, fixed on Alara. "She's one of them," Hemlock said, raising a trembling shotgun. "He brought one of them out." "No!" Arthur shouted, his voice raw. "It's over. The hollow. It's gone. It's all gone. Fire. An earthquake. It's gone." He stumbled forward, collapsing onto the porch steps. "They're dead, all of them. Malachi. The stone. It burned." The men looked at each other, then at the plume of dark smoke just visible over the distant ridge. They lowered their weapons. The fear on their faces was replaced by a slow, dawning awe. "He did it," one of the men whispered. "The Flatlander. He broke the holler." Silas looked at Alara, who cowered behind Arthur. What do we do with her?" "She's just a girl," Arthur said, his body shaking with exhaustion. She's the one who stopped it. She needs help. A doctor. Not this." Hemlock looked at the smoke for a long time. "The ground's been sour for nigh on 70 years. Ever since. Maybe the fever's broke." He spat his tobacco juice. "Get 'em inside, Silas. Get 'em water, and send a wire to the county sheriff in Springfield. Tell him there's been a mining collapse up in the hills, a bad one." The men on the porch nodded. The official story had been written. The Ozarks would keep their secrets. Arthur Vance's official report to the St. Louis Anthropological Society was a masterpiece of omission. He titled it, "A Study of Failed Isolationism and Folk Superstition in the Missouri Ozarks." He wrote of an isolated inbred community suffering from mass hysteria and probable fungal poisoning. Ergotism, perhaps, from their strange black bread, which led to ritualistic practices. He concluded that their settlement, built on unstable karst geology, had been tragically destroyed in a sudden seismic event, a sinkhole which had likely been triggered by their use of fire in a primitive religious ceremony. He mentioned the charismatic leader and the unfortunate loss of life. His report was dry, clinical, and utterly devoid of pulsing green stones, psychic whispers, or life-draining entities. His colleagues found the report serviceable, if somewhat lacking in lyrical detail. His hunt for ballads, they noted, had been a complete failure. He had not recorded a single song. Arthur Vance never returned to the Ozarks. He resigned his position at the society and took a quiet, unremarkable job as a librarian, spending the rest of his days surrounded by the comforting, logical silence of card catalogs and printed facts. He never married. He could not bear the touch of another person, the fear of that psychic violation, the memory of the stone's cold mental grasp. Alara was, as Arthur had requested, taken to a hospital in St. Louis, but she was not from their world. The sights and sounds of the city, the streetcars, the crowds, the electric lights, were a new kind of horror. She spoke of the blight of noise and the sickness of the world. She was eventually transferred to the city sanatorium, diagnosed with hysterical psychosis. Arthur visited her once. She was sitting in a walled garden, rocking back and forth, humming a tune. It was a strange, descending, tuneless melody. "Ilara?" he asked. She looked up at him, her eyes as vacant as Sister Bethia's had been. "It's not gone, Mr. Vance," she whispered, a knowing, terrified smile on her face. You can't kill the earth. You only broke the heart. But the roots are everywhere." She pointed to a crack in the garden's stone path. "It's listening." Arthur fled the sanatorium and never returned. 2 weeks after the mining collapse, the county sheriff, a practical man named Jedediah Pike, finally assembled a posse to investigate the rumors from Sparrow's Gap. Old Man Hemlock guided them to the dry creek bed. They found the boundary. The corn-husk dolls were gone, burned or fallen. The air was no longer silent. It was, in fact, filled with the buzzing of flies. When they reached the hollow, the posse stopped, the men removing their hats. It was not a hollow. It was a sinkhole, a massive gaping circular wound in the earth, easily half a mile across. The stench of sulfur and ash was overwhelming. At the very bottom, hundreds of feet down, they could see the smoking, blackened timbers of the chapel, looking like the charred ribs of a great dead beast. Sheriff Pike made his way down the treacherous slope. He found no bodies. He found no cabins. The earth had swallowed everything. The congregation of the rooted stone had been, as Hemlock had predicted, turned back to the soil. He did find one thing near the lip of the sinkhole, caught on a blasted tree root. It was a single, muddy, city-made boot. In his official ledger, Sheriff Pike wrote, "Investigated rumors of missing persons in the Black Ridge. Found evidence of a geological catastrophe, sinkhole, total loss of an unknown settlement. No survivors found. No further investigation warranted. Closed." The Ozarks, stubborn and silent, had hidden the wound. Time, as it always does, began to cover the scar. The mapmakers, who had never known of the hollow, continued to leave the space blank. The congregation was, once and for all, hidden by time. Arthur Vance aged. The year 1909 became 1919. The Great War, a horror that dwarfed his own, had come and gone. He lived in a small, respectable apartment in St. Louis, a quiet, bookish man who startled at loud noises and was known to avoid churches. He had, for the most part, convinced himself that the events in the hollow were a fever dream, a delusion brought on by isolation and the strange food of the hill folk. His logic had returned, walling off the memory. The stone was a mineral formation. The feeding was a primitive ritual. The whispers were the wind. He was wrong. It began in the autumn of 1923. It started with the smell, the faint, unmistakable scent of a damp root cellar, of ozone, and something metallic. He checked his apartment for mildew, for spoiled food. He found nothing. Then the whispers started. They were faint, just at the edge of his hearing. They came from the walls of his brick apartment, from the plaster. Yoth Soggoth, Yoth Soggoth. He told himself it was memory, trauma, the mind playing tricks. One night he awoke from a deep sleep, his heart pounding. The thrumming had returned. It was not in his head. It was in the floor. A low, rhythmic, subterranean pulse, shaking the very foundation of his building. He lit a kerosene lamp. He had never trusted the electric light, and looked down. There, in the corner of his bedroom, the floorboards were warping. They were being pushed up from below. Between the cracks, something was growing. It was pale, gray-green, and phosphorescent. A small, fibrous tendril, no thicker than a pencil, was pushing its way through the wood. It looked like a fungal mycelium. It looked like a root. Arthur backed away, his breath catching in his throat. Ilara's words from the sanatorium echoed in his mind. "You can't kill the earth. You only broke the heart. But the roots are everywhere." Arthur Vance, the librarian, became a recluse. He stopped going to work. He barricaded his apartment door. He spent his days and nights listening to the thrumming, which grew stronger. and watching the thing in his corner, which grew larger. The tendrils had spread. They formed a small, knotted mass, a nexus, in the corner of his room. It was about the size of a human heart, and in the dark, it pulsed with a faint, sickly green light. It was feeding. But on what? Arthur, in his terror, began to understand. The stone in the hollow had been the heart, as Ilara said, but the organism, Yoth-Sagath, was global. It was the sleeping intelligence of the planet, and he, by touching it, by connecting with it, had become a beacon. He had carried a piece of it back with him, like a spore. It was feeding on the city. It was feeding on the noise, on the blight, on the millions of souls packed together. It was feeding on the decay of the modern world that Malachi had so despised, and it needed a voice. Arthur found himself sitting on his stool, staring at the pulsing green mass in the corner. The whispers were no longer whispers. They were clear. They were instructions. They spoke of the sickness of the world, the purity of the soil, the beauty of the pruning. His mind, his St. Louis logic, was so tired of fighting. The thing in the corner offered peace. It offered strength. It offered an end to the noise. One night, his landlady, concerned by the smell and the silence, used her master key to enter his apartment. She found Arthur Vance sitting in the dark, his apartment filled with the smell of damp earth. He was staring at the glowing, root-like mass in the corner, which had now grown as large as a man. "Mr. Vance?" she said, her voice trembling. What is that?" Arthur Vance turned. His eyes, once the eyes of a skeptical academic, were now the color of flat gray stone. "It is the root," he said, his voice the cultured, precise cadence of a man he thought long dead. "It is the heart of God." The landlady screamed as the thin, fibrous tendrils, smelling of ozone and the grave, slithered across the floor toward her. "The world has sprung a leak," whispered Brother Arthur, "and the tithe must be paid." The story of Arthur Vance, the librarian, ends there, lost in the official records of a St. Louis asylum in 1924. His case filed under religious mania. His apartment was found empty, the floorboards in the corner ripped up, revealing only the dark, damp earth of the foundation. But the stories of the Ozarks, they continue. Even today, travelers in the deepest parts of the Missouri hills sometimes speak of a strange quiet. They speak of a path that isn't on a map, a place where the air goes still and the insects stop. They see strange, woven dolls hanging from the trees. Most are smart enough to turn back. Some are not. They say that if you get lost in that part of the woods, if you stand very still and press your ear to the ground, you can still feel it. A low, slow, steady thrumming, the heartbeat of the earth. They say that the rooted stone, though its heart was broken, is not dead. It is merely sleeping, dreaming, and waiting. The soil is patient, the roots are deep, and in the dark hollows of the Ozarks, far from the noise of the modern world, the ground is and always will be hungry. The most horrifying congregation was not the people. It was the land they served. And that land, hidden by time, is still waiting, still listening, still singing its oldest, darkest song.